friends, welcome to Watercolour Mini Projects for the Beginner. Today we'll be creating this sweet leaf botanical in part 2 of our pink and grey colour palette. I designed these tutorials to show you just how simple this medium can be and to remove the fear factor. You don't need to have expensive products, nor do you need to be an artist to create something beautiful. Starting with the basics, make sure you have a jar of fresh water and some paper towel on hand. Some inexpensive watercolour paper. I'm working on my favourite Mont 190 GSM A4 notepad here. I'll link it for you below in case you want to do the same. We're going to be working with just 3 colours to create this pretty layering of leaves: Quin Rose, Yellow Ochre and Paynes Grey. My brush is an inexpensive one. I picked up from a market stall holiday in Barcelona in 2017. It has acrylic pointed round bristles in a size 10. Note the lovely tip for creating fine details and a wide belly that holds lots of paint and moisture, perfect for creating washes and backgrounds. Okay, so I start off with just a really simple light outline of just a little square. It's the only thing I actually sketch at all. So if you can draw a box, you can do this. So I've just taken one of my favourite pencils and a really faint line, because we are going to be working with a very gentle colour palette, very watered down paints, so they're quite transparent in order for us to get that beautiful layering that we're looking at, which means that it's also super easy, because if you're not particularly happy with one of the leaves when you've painted it, you're going to layer other leaves over the top of it. So don't get bogged down in the shape. As you can see, I'm using the tip as I'm doing the leaves. You'll see that through the whole thing. I'm not diving in and having wonderful brush strokes and amazing control and all of these things that you hear and that you see. I'm not using expensive brushes or stylized brushes that you're using a certain way and that are incredibly scary to think about. You're going to use them and how much paper you're going to waste practicing. Do think inexpensive when you're thinking of practicing and having a play around with designs and work like this, especially when you're a beginner. In that way you don't feel heartbroken if you spend a fortune on paper and then the design doesn't work out quite the way you had intended. So I'm using the Paynes Grey here with lots and lots of water added in. There's no other colour added to that. It is literally just the little half pan, half cake of paints. You hardly need to touch these paints. The Royal Talens are a professional series, but they're still very inexpensive. They came in a beautiful timber box with really beautiful brushes. The actual palette that you can see there in the top right corner, it actually came with it. It clips in and can be removed. It came with everything I needed for around $100. I will link it in the description for you below as well, in case you would like to look into that or get something similar. The difference with the professional series, the paints, the pigment is so much better and it doesn't fade. So if you decide you would like to frame this at the end of it and you would like to celebrate this beautiful little artwork that you've created, or turn it into a card or something and give it to a friend, it's not going to fade over time and you're not going to lose all that pretty detail and that piece that you're quite proud of. So do consider the good quality paints. I did practice and I did paint for at least the first year using really cheap, inexpensive watercolor paints. Again, my website's linked below if you would like to look back on. I blog a lot of my work, so if you'd like to look back at those, at that previous work. Also used to post a lot of it. A lot of it's posted on IGTV, so you can watch those flick throughs and those tutorials as well and see me painting with really cheap, I mean, I'm like $15 student color, student quality paints, and I was really still happy with my work, and none of them have actually faded yet to this day, so touch wood. But moving on, I'm using the Royal Talens here. These are half cakes, and I'm just doing my leaves one at a time. And again, there's no sketch, there's no real plan. If you want to work with pencil, go nuts. do some light sketches for yourself, have an idea, or do like what I have done. And I played with that first one where it says perfectly imperfect, because that is my message to you guys. We're working with leaves here. Leaves are burned by the sun. They're damaged by birds and animals. They're beaten down by the rain. The perfect imperfection is the hardest part to capture, I guess, but it's also the easiest part to capture. So don't plan on having them perfect. Don't plan on having all the edges filled in. Allow some of that white page to shine through. Allow the edges to be crisp or not so crisp. Just have fun and layer it on. And as you can see, that's what I'm doing. I have only sped this up a tiniest little bit, so you're not seeing me kind of sitting there looking and not doing anything. But this is almost in real time. It's literally me having a play. It took me about 30 minutes to do this. I had a television show on I was enjoying. I had my family wandering around doing their thing around me, asking questions. I'm a mum too. Kids are always wanting something. So this was just a fun tutorial I created. I really want you to realize that watercolor is not scary. You don't need to be an artist. You don't need to have years of experience. This is just supposed to be joyful and fun. So I'm literally there. You can see me stopping and thinking, where do I want to put this leaf? Do I want to put here? Do I want to put there? Do I want to change my color yet? Or I'm going to keep working with the grays? Literally just thinking it through as I go. I ended up doing this little round and then really loved that it looked like a leaf that was on its side as well. And I actually purposely added a few more of those in, and I'll definitely be thinking when I'm painting in purpose, and I need to think about a leaf on its side as well, like it's arched over or it's missing half of itself. Anyway, I literally just go on. I've got some with little branches, some where the leaf is peeping down directly from the top of the square. The only reason that I put the border in is just to give myself a rough indication of where I'm starting this square, because I'm picturing this in a gift card or in a little frame with a nice wide mat around it, and I'm picturing it actually hung on my wall in the studio. So I didn't have a real plan in place to begin with, but I really enjoyed this process so much that I really think that I'm going to do more of them and frame these like little landscapes and the little leaves. And this little mini botanical or the mini watercolor projects, I'm actually going to expand on this and do lots of them. So and I'm going to turn that into a playlist too. So if you're following me, please hit subscribe on the channel and support me and the channel, and I'll be doing lots of these, and I'm going to be keeping the color palette really simple for you as well. I'm going to be only working with 1 or 2 or 3 colors throughout, so that you really can see how well the colors work together, and you don't need to get overwhelmed thinking of color palette and what is going to work and what isn't going to work and how complicated it is to mix, etc. So I do have the China White pan showing here, but I didn't actually use the white really. I actually used the ochre and the rose and mixed those together. You can see in the top right corner in the little well, I mixed them together to create that beautiful peach. And you can see I'm barely touching these cakes with the brush. I've dipped them in my water. Just tap the top of the paint ever so gently, and not when the brush is too wet or it creates a big pool, and then add it in when I think that I need to top up the color. It was so easy to blend the same color or just a slightly deeper shade. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm blending a slightly deeper shade, so when I lay the next leaves over, I'm also waiting for the leaves to dry, because if I'm putting wet on wet, what's going to happen? The colors are going to bleed together and the leaves aren't going to stay defined as individual shapes. I'll start to blend and become a blob, and I don't want that to happen. Okay, so give your watercolors a chance to dry before you layer the next color over, and that way it'll give you more control and you won't find that, and you won't give up on the process, because you won't think, oh my goodness, my watercolor ends up being just a blob and it doesn't become what I wanted it to. See, so I'm actually going over the top with the next leaves, and I'm again just using the Paynes grey but in a different concentration. So it's slightly darker. You can see me just picking up a little bit of paint on my brush. This brush I love, but it does hold a lot of moisture and a lot of color if I'm not careful. So it does tend to, sometimes it can pull too much and then it's harder to control. So using the tip like I'm using and just keeping a certain amount of moisture on that brush. Don't forget, that's what that paper towel's there for. Just if you think too much water on that, just dab it on your paper towel and absorb some of that up. Put your brush back on the place where you were painting and it'll absorb like a sponge and it'll pick some more of that up. So if you do get it too moist, you definitely can use it like an eraser almost without even having to pick up some paper towel or something like that. You can literally put a dry brush, so if you have a spare one, or dry off the one you're using, put it back on carefully where you were working and let it absorb that moisture, and again just dab it back off on your paper towel. So you can see me coming in here now with that deeper peach that I had just mixed up. You can see that I picked up some of the white but not very much of it, and I'm not sure, I don't think I actually used the color where I mixed it. I actually think I went and mixed another one without the white in it, but you don't be afraid to use a little bit of white. You definitely can, but it does tend to make the opacity milkier, so you don't see the transparent layer quite as well. And on these leaves I really want to have that transparency where you've got the other leaf kind of peeking through. So it is very much like a tree. If you're standing underneath a tree and you're looking up, all those leaves kind of overlap and blend together, and that's what's real. That's nature in her finest form. So here you go again. I'm coming back in. I'm not keeping a rhyme or a reason. I'm literally just feeling my way. This is completely an intuitive process. One of the wonderful things about working with watercolor and working without a sketch is just feeling your way through. You can see on that last leaf I decided I wanted to darken the branch up ever so slightly in the vein, so I put the leaf shape in place there, and then I went back and just dipped just the very tip in the pan and came back and just dabbed that in wet on wet, and I'm letting it just dry and sit and bleed and blend. And as you can see, as it dries, that color seeps out into the rest of the leaf and creates this beautiful blend of color. Okay, so this is the glory of watercolor and playing around and just getting to know your brush. I mean, I have so many brushes, and like I said, when I bought this paint set, I had so many brushes added in to my mix, and I still go back to my favorites. I go back to this one, and I use just the one to really create everything from a background. So if you want to watch the part 1 on this, I will link it below. So the part 1 was the landscape you can see at the top. That's one I did first, and I used this exact same brush to do an entire background wash, and then I just dried it off on my paper towel and I came in and started adding the detail in. So I'll link these two together so that you can actually I've created a playlist, a mini projects playlist. So I will link that list to these both, so it'll make it easier. And if you hit subscribe, when you hit subscribe, my friend, you'll be able to then go to that playlist and play with all the different, and look at all the different videos I create, keeping this our tools basic, keeping our prices down, so be a beginner and enjoy it, and don't feel that you've spent a fortune on paper and paints and then it's discouraging and it's expensive, so you can't start. Literally with $20 you can start watercoloring. You can buy paints, even if you just buy a small cheap set. You can buy a pad of paper. Mont is my absolute favorite to work on. I love the texture and the size of the pads. I get a lot of paper. Their thickness is lovely, so they're a 190 or more GSM. So they've got a nice thick cardstock. They're lovely to work on. They're cheap. They're inexpensive to find. They hold the paint beautifully. It doesn't bleed out where I don't want it to go or where I haven't put the moisture. My brush, like I said, I picked up at a market stall, and it was only a couple of dollars. As soon as I saw them, I just like, that's it. I need to buy something that I will use every day and make me think of that holiday and that wonderful time, and it does exactly that. So don't be afraid to start. Don't be thinking it's going to have to be too expensive. Don't be thinking that it's not for you. Okay, so I was feeling so very zen and relaxed while I was creating this, that I thought, you know what, I'm going to add in a word underneath my leaves, just saying breathe. And I thought that's a good one for me, to remember to stop and smell the roses and have some downtime and find time doing all these things I love. And this was absolutely one of them. And you can see me very gently with my pencil. This is very light, so I'm not causing an indent on the page. And I'm popping that word in there, and actually go back and erase that E and fix up, because I wasn't happy with how that E was looking. So I do go back and fix that E, and I actually go back and as well, because I let that paint dry while I was getting creative with the lettering. And I'm going back in now and adding a little bit more depth, a little bit more dimension. So by adding this, letting it dry and then coming back in wet on dry, it makes it, you can make it pop. So if it's feeling quite flat and two-dimensional, going back in once your page is dry and adding a little bit of color gives you amazing control. So I'm just coming in on some of these darker leaves, the darker grey leaves, and I'm adding just a little bit of veining, a little bit of darkness around the actual stem, a little bit of detail, and I actually do the same with the pink. Okay, so now that I've finished my leaves and I'm happy with the definition on them, and that some are a little bit darker and the additional details that I'm wanting just to make a pop, I just felt that their bottom border needs a little extra something. So I've got my breathe there to border that word. I will go in and ink that in just a moment, but I want to get my my watercolor, my colors in there and my painting done first. So I'm just going in and adding a little bit of a blush, a bit of that peach tone, darkening up the edges, allowing that wet on wet to blend and bleed in there and to really highlight that corner. You can see here I've decided that it just felt like that was a little bit high, so I just took that color off my brush, washed it off, dried that on my paper towel, and then picked up some nice clean water and gave that a gentle brush over that color, and then took some clean paper towel and just absorbed that like a sponge. And as you can see, it removes that darker color up near the T and the H and brought that border back down again. So don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid that if you're not quite happy with how something's looking, to jump in there with your brush. You can use a new clean brush, a new dry brush, or you can use the one you currently have just by cleaning it off and drying it off on your paper towel, and then coming back in with some fresh water and some clean paper towel to blot some of that color off. Okay, so now I'm just going in with my favorite pigment liners. This is a 0.03, and I'm just adding in the word breathe. I'm being careful here not to actually go over the leaf, because I want this word to look like it sits behind it and that the leaves themselves are the highlight. So just inking that gently. I'll let that all dry, including the ink. Give it a minute to seep in and dry nicely before I come in with my Kneadable eraser and erase all those lines off. And there you'll have it, this piece, a sweet little piece. It took around half an hour to do. It was completely zen, so relaxed doing it, didn't overthink it, just enjoyed the process. This doesn't have to be a scary medium. And please support the channel if you'd like to see more of these mini tutorials. Thanks so much.